What are the reasons we as diabetics are highly likely to be deficient in vitamin D? Are our current sources flawed and incomplete? What does vitamin D for your diabetic body, and how is it related to both glucose control and, just as importantly, our lifespans? Today, you will find out the biggest mistake we have all been making, and that includes me too. Is there another related yet unknown molecule produced naturally by our bodies that is also responsible for many aspects of our health? But before we begin, let me welcome all of you resilient diabetics out there. This is the channel we turn ordinary, struggling diabetics into extraordinarily well-controlled diabetics. If you don't know who I am and you are brand new to this channel, I welcome you. My name is Sampat, and I became an insulin-dependent diabetic a little over 6 years ago due to an autoimmune attack which caused the destruction of my pancreas. So not only am I a diabetic just like you, where we will be walking that walk and we got to talk that talk, but I do also have a University of Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition dietetics, and that does come in very handy in discussing all the intricacies of being a diabetic. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, followed by the gray notification bell, and then choose turn on all notifications if you want to be notified when the next Resilient Diabetic video has been published. As with all my videos, this should not be considered personal medical advice. This is my interpretation of the latest research. If you want medical advice, please always consult your physician. Vitamin D is not just necessary to keep our bones strong, for muscle movement, and to keep our immune system working. It appears equally important for healthy thyroid functions as well as cardiovascular health, and for us diabetics, it's even more critical. Unfortunately, many doctors are not up to date or exposed to vitamin D in med school. So what you will learn today can and should be shared with your doctor on your next visit for your vested interest. Research has repeatedly found a clear association between low vitamin D levels in patients with insulin resistance, which significantly increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and then subsequently type 1 diabetes. In fact, it is known now every cell and tissue within the body has a vitamin D receptor. In the episode Top Tests for Diabetes, we discussed the top labs and preventative tests all diabetics should have post-diagnosis. I'll put a link in the description box if you missed that episode. The vitamin D panel was one of the many tests my doctor did not perform upon diagnosis. So lo and behold, when I requested, and in many ways I had to insist this test being done, it came back pathetically low, as you can now see. So this leads into one of our main questions. What are the main sources of vitamin D, and why all of a sudden we are now becoming highly deficient? I have personally made some critical mistakes with my understanding of this vitamin, which I cannot wait to share with you today. The three sources of vitamin D, which we now know, come from food, the sun, and now the big push for everyone to be on supplements. Which ones are the best and why? The first critical aspect to understand is that there are two human-made forms of this vitamin, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. Vitamin D2 is a synthetic version which has a shorter shelf life, while vitamin D3 is the same natural vitamin D that is produced by the body following exposure to UVB rays. Studies have shown that vitamin D3 appears to be 3 times more effective than vitamin D2. But most products that include the words good source of vitamin D or fortified with vitamin D on their labels contain the hugely inferior vitamin D2. So let's talk about our dietary needs. As diabetics, it's always best to try and meet our nutritional needs through the right foods first. But here is the first limiting factor. We can only get between 10 and 20% of our daily requirements of vitamin D from our food alone. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it will be found in fatty protein foods like salmon, tuna, mackerel are amongst some of the best sources of vitamin D. Your whole dairy products, including cheese, milk, yogurt, and egg yolks are also good sources of vitamin D. One must remember, many of the fat-free foods like low-fat and skim milk, cereals, and orange juice have the inferior D2 fortified in them, and the amounts, they are quite limiting. It's around 100 IU per serving. For us diabetics, we cannot drink milk or consume orange juice or breads for that matter. Far too much carbohydrates and sugars in them. And the amounts of vitamin D are way too low anyways. We would need around 20 glasses of orange juice to meet our daily requirements of vitamin D. So if only 10 to 20% of our vitamin D is actually coming from our diet, where is the remaining 80% to come from? The bulk of vitamin D is usually provided by our skins from UVB exposure to the sun. But sun-induced vitamin D synthesis is greatly influenced by the season, the time of the day, the latitude, the altitude, air pollution, skin pigmentation, body fat levels, sunscreen use, and aging. So let's briefly discuss the metabolism of vitamin D and how it's made by our bodies. During exposure to sunlight, 7-dehydrocholesterol in the skin absorbs UVB radiation and is then converted to a pre-vitamin D3. Vitamin D is metabolized sequentially first in the liver and then the kidneys from 25-hydroxy-vitamin D3, which is the major circulating form, to 125-dihydroxy D3, which is the biological active form, respectively. So this leads us to our first main concern. Can and should we expose ourselves more to the sun? So here are some fun facts for you. Sunshine reduces the rate of death for a number of conditions. As you can see by the chart, death rates or all-cause mortality between both hemispheres increases in winter months. Equatorial countries have much less variation. If you live closer to the equator, you can get all the vitamin D you need from the sun. Those in the northern and southern latitudes will be significantly more deficient. Studies do clearly show those with exposure to the sun have a significantly greater trend towards lower mortality. Those without any history of sunburns had a higher death rate than those with sunburns. Even in the early 1900s, sanatorium doctors could clearly see the benefits from the sun and its healing properties. And what is a sanatorium, you may ask? A sanatorium was a medical facility that was specially run for patients who were suffering from long-term illnesses, especially respiratory issues. They, even then, realized the more they exposed their patients to the sun, the healthier they would become. But there needs to be a balance between the benefits and the risks of the sun. And the elephant in the room is skin cancer. But on the other side of the coin, UV radiation has been associated with a drop in 14 other cancers, as well as reducing the rate of heart disease and diabetes. To understand the risk to reward ratio, we actually first need to discuss the three types of sun radiation: ultraviolet A, ultraviolet B, and C. Ultraviolet B radiation is the double-edged sword, the ones we need to worry about and the ones we have to be grateful for. The thicker layer of atmosphere UVB has to pass through, the less it can strike the ground. What that means is different times of the day change the exposure to ultraviolet B. When the sun is directly overhead, it is passing through the shortest levels of the atmosphere. Earlier in the day and later in the day, these rays pass through a much thicker layer, which then affects UVB levels. UVB is the principal cause of skin cancer, but it is what is also directly leading to vitamin D through our skins from the cholesterol molecule. But here is what has changed over the last few years. It is the understanding through many well-controlled studies that show vitamin D supplementation does not lead to an increased lifespan. They show there is another reason for this increased lifespan. What the latest research has shown is that it is the UVA radiation releases a substance called nitric oxide from the skin into the body like UVB does for vitamin D. And what does nitric oxide do? It is the compound that relaxes our blood vessels, which then improves blood pressure. There is a direct correlation between blood pressure readings in the summer versus the winter and how much UVA radiation one gets exposed to. That is why you see a peak of heart attacks in the winter. Now, this is really exciting news for us diabetics. Nitric oxide is the other main factor contributing to insulin sensitivity. This chart shows that your A1C will be lower in the summer months and higher in the winter months. So one cannot rule out the link nitric oxide has alongside vitamin D to insulin sensitivity. But remember, this dual combination only comes from the sun. So then how do we get sun exposure without burning? And remember, some medications and some exposure do not mix. So you would have to talk to your doctor about this. You would want to see shadows. If your shadow is as long as you are tall, then you should be able to spend about 30 minutes in the sun without any protection. But one of the biggest mistakes we can make is to confuse temperature and sun exposure. Just because it's hot does not mean you're getting more sun. So militantly avoiding the sun may do us more harm than good. And I love this study where they looked at 47 dermatologists in Australia. 83% of them were vitamin D deficient. 15% of them had levels so low they were associated with rickets. So it should be no surprise that these dermatologists have as much affection towards the sun as vampires do, and you can see the results. Exposing your skin to the sun for about 15 to 20 minutes a day can help increase your body's own production of vitamin D and nitric oxide, thus reducing your risk of diabetes and other serious medical conditions. The third way of getting vitamin D is through supplementation. So let's briefly cover that today so I can put this all together for you. Caution should always be taken with vitamin D doses for people with or without diabetes, and one should always work with a doctor for an optimal dose. Depending on the doctor, the current recommended daily dose to maintain, I said the word maintain, optimal vitamin D levels is around 1,000 to 2,000 IUs per day. For patients whose blood work reveals a vitamin D deficiency, 4,000 daily or 50,000 IUs weekly are usually given for short periods of time. And that is what my doctor put me on. It is a 50,000 IU gel tab, which is to be taken once a week. But here's the first problem. The prescription I'm getting is the inferior vitamin D2, not vitamin D3. You can get vitamin D3 over the counter or at any health food store or pharmacy without prescription. But it is the inferior D2 that is in the prescription version and is used to fortify many of our foods. It's kind of backwards if you ask me. So vitamin A, vitamin D, E, and K are all fat-soluble vitamins, which means they do not mix in water and are absorbed much better with fatty meals. But there is a limit on how much the body can absorb at any one time. For example, many studies show that around only 1,200 units out of my entire 50,000 unit prescription gel can be absorbed at once. That is why it is suggested to be taken daily, 1,000 to around 10,000 IU per day. But to prevent overdoses, you must not guess and work with your doctor by running the right tests several times per year. And it is the 25-hydroxy vitamin D test that you want done. Pause this video and write that down. This is the other reason for the new discovery of vitamin D deficiency. The wrong tests have been done. Second, and this is really important to note, your results may vary as much as 30% depending on what time of the day you take the test. morning versus afternoon. And you have to factor in the seasons. Sun exposure during summer months against your winter months. And how would you start supplementation according to the known experts on vitamin D metabolism? 1,000 units per 25 pounds of body weight. So if one weighed 150 pounds, then they'd want to take 6,000 IU daily until they got to the right range. But one has to remember, it takes a minimum of 2 to 3 months for vitamin D levels to stabilize into that right range. So what would most experts consider to be a good 25-hydroxy vitamin D level to be? If you talk to most endocrinologists, they would say around the 40 to 60 range. And other doctors prefer patients to be in the 60 to 70 range. And how do they come up with those numbers? For one, that is where the feedback loop settles in with the parathyroid. But second, and just importantly, looking at real world examples. People in countries who still have that hunter-gatherer lifestyle, that is where they live outside, they farm outside, usually maintain vitamin D levels in the 40 to 60 range without taking any supplements. So that is pretty much where you'd want to be too. So let me put this all together for you and explain how I've modified my lifestyle to get more vitamin D. First, I had to seriously rethink my approach to the sun. I thought I was getting enough, but I was clearly wrong. Melanin is what gives our skin its color. But melanin is able to absorb UVB radiation from the sun and reduce the skin's capacity to produce vitamin D. So those of us who are darker by nature will require at least 3 to 5 times longer exposure to make the same amounts of vitamin D as people with lighter skin tones. I even thought my 20 to 30 commute in the car with the sun coming down on my arms was enough time. But little did I know, and through a little bit of research, come to find out, my car has those protective layers against UVB light. So, some of the modern cars and even our home windows block this needed light. So I started playing some basketball in the backyard driveway with my son on the weekends in the late afternoons where I could cast that all-important shadow we've discussed. But with my shirt off for maximum exposure for approximately 30 minutes at a time. And it is in those late evenings and following mornings where I seem to get the most hypoglycemic events. That tells me the sun exposure does directly lower my blood sugars if my insulin is kept constant. It has been absolutely drilled into our heads. The sun is bad. It's taboo to go outside. So everyone, for what seems like generations now, is all covered up everywhere they go. We as a society have very limited exposure anymore. We spend most of our day in the office, behind a computer, and we cannot forget our kids who may be locked up in the house most of the day too, instead of playing outside like previous generations did. That has to change. So, in my humble opinion, go outside and enjoy the sun. Do a little exercise either early in the mornings or later in the afternoons. We as humans have been evolutionarily designed to benefit from the sun. You have to think of your skin like a solar panel. The greater the surface area exposed, the greater the vitamin D synthesis and the added nitric oxide production. Since my body's naturally a bit darker, I still may need a little bit more sun and an added good vitamin D3 supplement, not D2 as we have discussed. The amounts, however, will be adjusted based on my lab work. Speaking of exercise in the mornings, I will set up a direct playlist for you with more life-changing videos directly related to diet and exercise. In the video, Diabetic Muscle Building, you will find out why maintaining and keeping your muscle tissue is so critical towards normalizing and controlling blood sugars. How do these unique fibers influence not only our health, but metabolism and overall quality of life? What about protein? Is protein the single most important macronutrient for us diabetics, especially when it comes to maintaining and building all that important muscle mass, which is related to glucose control? If you're on your desktop or laptop, I want you to use your mouse to click that upcoming box. If you're on your mobile device, I want you to tap that with your fingers. The first is the link to subscribe to this all-important channel. The second is the link to the playlist mentioned on exercise. So, have a great and productive day, and we will see you soon with another new episode, which are generally released weekly. Bye for now.